My name's Siobhan. I'm Head of Leisure for Alive West Norfolk. We are based in the west of Norfolk and are a wholly owned company.
Brilliant. Thanks, Siobhan. Daniel.
Hi, Martin. Daniel Gammons. I'm the Business Director for Liberty Leisure in West Nottingham.
Andy King, probably no introduction required, but go for it.
Hi, Martin. Nice to see you. Andy King, GM Active in this context, I suppose.
Thank you. Matt.
Morning, Martin. Matt Parker, Managing Director for Brio, wholly owned company in Cheshire West and Chester.
Excellent. I'm not going to do John Rees.
Hi, Martin. I'm Rhys Jones, Chief Operating Officer for Plymouth Active, down in Plymouth, and an unashamedly long-time Facebook stalker of yours. Sorry, not Facebook, LinkedIn.
I was going to say I've never seen him on Facebook.
LinkedIn.
I'm not sure
LinkedIn,
that works in that piece. Aidan.
Hi, how are you doing? I'm Aidan Murphy. I'm the Head of Operations at Barrow Ford Limited up in Cumbria.
Scott.
Hi, Martin. Scott Brinkworth, Head of Leisure for Rubicon Leisure in Redditch, Worcestershire. We're a wholly owned company.
Darren.
Morning, Martin. Darren Sickham, Managing Director for Vola Leisure in Knowsley, a wholly owned company.
And I think you know Mark as well, so I don't think I'll do the intro for Mark, if that's all right. The best one actually for Martin, if you want him on social media, is Twitter, because his handle on Twitter is Grooby Kid, which has always intrigued me. Apart from the fact, of course, I know why, because I live quite close to where Martin lives, but that's by the by. So, Martyn Allison, we're here to listen to your views. We want to know where we're travelling, what you're hearing, what you're seeing, and how we can move forward.
Wow. Thank you, David. Little bit about myself first. David's question: why do I have any legitimacy to even be on this call with you? I've worked in the sector for I moved into leisure in the late 70s, early 80s, so that's how far I go back. I've done what a lot of you guys done. I've run facilities, I've run departments, I've been a deputy director and director of leisure at Leicester. Then I moved off and spent 8 years as assistant chief exec at Leicester, where I did a lot of the corporate management and political management. And if you know Leicester, you know why it needs to be politically managed. And I think this is interesting to the conversation and the position we're in. I got sucked back into the world of leisure by a guy called Tim Garfield, who was regional director of Sport England in the East Midlands. And it was just post the 97 election and Blair's massive win with a huge agenda of change, and that triggered a huge local government reform process. Never been seen at the scale of that before. It shook the very foundations of all public services, but particularly local government. And basically let's just call it the sport and leisure sector, because we didn't talk about physical activity then days. Just was behind the curve. They just were nowhere near what the rest of public services were dealing with, which was really about performance management, measurement, demonstration of impact. And Tim encouraged me to help the sector try and wrestle with why it was behind the curve. And that led to a number of projects, and it ended up with me to go and working for the IDA, which was the Local Government Association's Improvement and Development Agency. And I became their national advisor for culture and sport. So I didn't just have the world of sport. I had libraries, arts, museums, English heritage. I haven't got time to go into the nature of the project, but it was basically to try to get the sector to catch up with the rest of the public service reform agenda. And we did. We did catch up. We did start to get in those days the concepts of local area agreements and inspection routines. Unfortunately, by the time we caught up, the world had moved on, and we were back to square one almost. I tell that story because I feel we're in an interesting comparator position at the moment. We could be facing a huge election win with a huge majority, but we're in a very, very different financial position than Blair was. And I think the sector needs to get its head round what its narrative really is to a new government. We've been trying, some of you know, I've been working with Andy Reid behind the scenes. He was a former Labour MP in Loughborough. He's managed to get himself a bit of an inside track in terms of a policy advisor. We set off to try and influence the manifesto. We just started that journey when then some guy stood in the rain and called an election. So we didn't get very far down that road. But Andy did have one meeting with all the SPADs, who are the special advisors for all the ministers. And he came back saying, I'm worried because how young they all are. They're all highly clever, but I'm not sure how intelligent they are. And I didn't get a great deal of traction. We just started to edge our way into the arguments around our contribution to preventive health and the whole health agenda. Anyway, the election's been called. Labour Party manifesto published yesterday. I don't know how many people have had a chance to see it. My initial take is it's as I expected. There's a bit on elite sport events. There is a recognition of the power of those events economically and soft power. There is a bit on school sport, which was expected. There's a recognition about growing grassroots sport. There is a lot on health prevention and health inequality. Lots of chines of Marmot, and those of you who've read my stuff, I'm a huge advocate of Michael Marmot. I think that's where the policy base grows from. But surprise, surprise, a lot of talk about childhood obesity and controlling food. Some talk about controlling smoking and vaping. Both of those two have been huge priorities for public health for decades. No mention I've found yet of the role of physical activity. And the big disappointment for me is nothing really to do with the challenges of social care. A lot of the problems you guys are facing in local government are partly due to 12 years of austerity, but more importantly, they're due to the constant growth in demands from social care, particularly in upper tier councils. And a lot of the councils who are currently on the verge of bankruptcy are on the verge of bankruptcy because every bit of their budget and now just about all their reserves have been soaked up sustaining adult social care and child social care. And until local government finds, or a central government finds, a solution to the social care crisis, I'm afraid local government will continue to suffer financially. So I'm not particularly hopeful at the moment. In terms of local government, there is absolutely no talk about redressing the downsizing of local government. Everything depends on economic growth, which could take 2, 3, 4 years before it releases public services. So what does our new narrative need to look like? Well, I've had loads of conversations with Andy. I'm really impressed with some of the stuff Mark's been doing. He's grabbed me by the throat and got me really thinking quite differently. So I think the narrative really going forward is got to be about, we have a health crisis. We're already doing a lot to solve that process. We've got, I mean, some of the case studies I've been collecting in the last 6 weeks for Andy are stunning examples, but they are really evidence-based in a way they've never been evidence-based before. There are 1 or 2 examples appearing of people making good connections with integrated care systems. A much published one recently was Active Oxfordshire, that had built a relationship with a number of district councils, the county council, and the integrated care system, which had led to a funding stream opening up. There are these pockets where, and I have to say, I think it's where the leadership is great, where relationships have been built over a period of time, where people are thinking radically different, and there is a clear common purpose that people are building. I think if we could just be big enough as a sector to acknowledge that what works needs replicating and building on and scaling up, I think we have got an answer this government will ultimately have to embrace. But it's not going to be an easy journey. So that there's 2 tensions. There is an upward journey of hope and aspiration where there's a positive future, but there is a current crisis that and you guys have just been talking about it. How do you survive until a new wave of opportunity comes up? I think that'll do as a background. So I suppose the answer to your question, David, I've been in this sector a long time. I'm passionate about it. I've been through one radical shift in politics where we took a long time to catch up and wake up. And I'm just determined this time I'll do what I can to help us not make that same mistake again. There you go.
Cheers, Martyn. It's really useful, and context as ever is always valuable. And I'm going to do something I don't normally do in this role, because normally I chair, so I go to the end and I wait for everybody else to have their say. But I'd be really interested in your view in this, because we grab a coffee, we grab a beer, we grab a sandwich occasionally, and we talk to each other, and it's always interesting. But you've just said that everything relies on economic growth in order to be able to get local authorities and the public sector back to a place where they can deliver in a way that works for the communities that they're currently looking after. So I'll throw the challenge out there. So instead of us constantly working in the health environment and trying to get health as our message, why aren't we working around productivity? Why aren't we doing something around getting the nation back to work so we can be more productive and therefore have greater economic growth? Why isn't that the focus?
You tell me. You the guy. I think we have to be careful. We're looking at a political process that is designed to win an election, not necessarily to run a government. Unfortunately, in this country, we have this absolutely central debate around taxation. And you don't win an election unless you have a strategy for managing that. And that's what this is all about at the bottom line. That's why I say we need a new narrative, because what emerges fairly quickly after the election date will have a tone that is different to what you've been hearing over the last few weeks, if they win that bigger majority. And that's what we weren't ready for in 97. Blair came in with a very clear agenda. He hit the ground running. The speed at which things happened was just incredible. Absolutely incredible. So we need to be mindful. What we're hearing now may not be what actually happens. And that means we've got to get very close to the politics, and we've got to understand it. And we've got to try and do our best to influence what emerges out of that period.
All right. Thanks, Martyn. I'll now let others have a say. Is there anybody else? Is there a question for Martyn? Is there something that Martyn said that you'd like more information on? John?
Yeah, thanks, Martyn. I suppose I just wonder, and you've covered some of this, but could you sort of share your thoughts on whether there are maybe 2 or 3 opportunities, bearing in mind that this is a LATCO group, a local authority trading company group, and that may provide a nuance to it. But are there 2 or 3 opportunities that you can think of that we should move forward confidently on, and tell us briefly a bit about how we might do that?
I think the biggest opportunity, I think it lies around the relationship with the new integrated care systems. They have to tackle the issues of population health. They're required to focus on health inequality. They're required to move into the preventive agenda. A lot of them are in financial difficulties at the moment, and it is an influencing challenge. I was talking to the guy at Oxfordshire, because I collected a case study from him. It's taken months of careful relationship building at that interface to get to the point where there's enough trust to start investing in a common agenda that is about addressing health inequality in Oxfordshire. It didn't happen overnight, but he thinks what won the arguments was the evidence that they could present of what they'd done already. So I think the second opportunity is, and you know, these are the conversations I've had with Mark and Andy. You know, there is some really good examples now of what people have achieved with the capacity they currently have by redesigning what they're already doing. I mean, is Mark still on the call? I don't know whether he is, and Andy's there. They could tell you what they've achieved and how they've achieved it. All I'm doing is capturing their success and trying to amplify it. So I think the second opportunity is to do something that aligns with that thinking and show that you are capable of doing what they want you to do. So I think if you can join up your own abilities to move in this direction, however difficult it is. I've been working a lot with Warren Smythe over in Suffolk. You know, he's just shared with me some tremendous evidence of a long relationship. I mean, I first talked to him about 4 years ago about how do I talk to health. It's taken him 4 years to build up that portfolio of evidence that is now reached a point where there is a willingness to almost talk about mainstreaming a relationship. So, you know, I think those who have been doing this for the last 4 years will probably be in a stronger position to take the opportunity over the next 2 or 3 years. It sounds twee and simple, but you know, is it not as simple as that?
I would agree with that, Martin. I think unfortunately, we get dragged into ways of working and thinking that are about short-term operationalized issues. People have heard me say before, because you have to in some respects, it becomes about today, tomorrow, next week. And it's all about quantitative measures, or a lot about quantitative measures and finance and cost, as opposed to reframing the narrative around longer term strategic collaborative value opportunities. And we find it difficult to break out from the short term, I think, into the long term, no doubt for very good reasons. And some people say it is all about people, and it is, and building rapport and opportunity with others, recognizing that what we do can help them to do what they need to do, takes time, and it feels like that's the right way to go. And some of the success stories that we know about demonstrate exactly that. People who have been doggedly working on building relationships and demonstrating how they can help others, as opposed to how others can just help them. That seems to me where the sweet spot is. And for organisations like LATCOs that are relatively new, there would seem to be a way or a potential to enhance that relationship, genuine partnering opportunity, as a key tenet of the model.
But those choices, John, that you're spelling out there are choices of leadership. Do I spend my time doing that, or do I spend my time doing that?
Yeah, completely agree. Completely agree. Sorry, I'll stop now. Thank you, Dave.
That's absolutely fine. So I've got 3 more hands up. Reese, I know you put yours up first. Is that related to what John was asking, or is it a separate subject?
It follows on quite nicely, I think. Actually.
Okay, go for it. And then it's going to be Andy, and then Matt. All right, and then Mark.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's all about people and all about relationships. And just listening to Martin there, look, I mean, this might be controversial, but all this high-level discussion with government, you know, is there any point? Are we better off coming together, mobilising, local place-based approach, encourage that leadership, go and have those conversations, and just fucking get on with it, you know, because we can do it, right? We know we can do it. So if we find a forum where we can all come together and have those conversations, have that positive impact, will it just move in that direction? Which I think is what you were just alluding to, Martin, because I get really frustrated, and it's hats off to you guys going into government all the time, but my God, you can make it work if you really want and you get the right conversations going. So yeah, I just thought, is there a way we can come together?
I totally agree with you, Reece, and I love the attitude of that, and that's what's underpinning, I think, some of the conversations we've been having. Yeah, you know, the sector has tried to talk to the last government, or the current government. I better be careful, it's being tamed. They've been talking to the current government. You know, if we're honest, has it really worked? You know, we haven't landed a lot. What we have landed has come with an incredible number of strings attached to it. Certainly talking to colleagues still at the LGA, they find it really difficult to land. So that's why I think we're talking about a narrative that says, stop asking government to give us permission to do something.
Yeah.
Demonstrate to them that we're already bloody doing this.
Yeah.
And it's having an impact, and it is successful, and it is aligned with Marmot and prevention, and it is what integrated care systems need to make a difference on population to health. And I think if you can get down that route, they become the followers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely agree. You know, all that energy you guys are putting into government, could you put that energy back into us? Could you put it back into the leaders are in the group and doing it? I don't know. Question.
Yeah. I think the problem is, really, and I exchanged this with an email with somebody this morning, and I won't say who it was, who'd got wind of the fact that I'm writing this document, collecting this evidence, and said, can they help? And I think the problem is the evidence and the story I want to tell is still partial. So we've almost got to do a narrative that looks two ways at the same time. On the one hand, it's got to convince government we are doing it and we are on our journey. But we've also got to get the sector to realise that they've got to get in that same place too. So, you know, unless we can get, at the moment, let's just assume we've got 10% of the sector working in this way. I've no idea, can't quantify it. We need to get 50% of the sector working in this way before we're going to be really taken seriously. Every integrated care system has got to have a successful relationship with our sector for nationally people to say to government, this is a good way of working. Look what we've achieved. So unless we get the sector following the good practice and replicating it and growing it, the voice is weaker. So I think my narrative is as much about saying to the rest of the sector, for God's sake, stop waiting for local government, for central government to give you more money, because it ain't coming, pal. So does that make sense, Reece?
Yeah, totally. And I think the other way, I'll stop in a second, Dave. Just getting that you got to get the the big national organisations on board as well. You know, the people like your GLLs, your SLM. You know, the ones that, really in the room, because they got such a big hold on some of the public leisure stuff as well.
I'm not sure they are in the room, really.
No, they're not. They're not in the room. Exactly that. They're not in the room, which is, it's all. That would help the movement forward.
Yeah. Well said, Reece.
Brilliant. Thank you, Reece. Great. A really useful comment. That's the value of what we do, isn't it? Matt, over to you. And it's Andy King first, then Matt, and then Mark. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Yeah, I've got loads of things, to be honest, but I won't take up every time. But first and foremost, when you talk about younger people on a stage, get Reece on there. He was on with us yesterday, and he shared with me some comment. He totally affected somebody yesterday who felt strong enough to contact him and say what happened. So yeah, if you want younger people on the stage, get Reece, and I'm sure some of the others on the table, Matt as well. Get them there. Then
I can retire, Andy.
Yeah, well, we all can, Martin. We can all bugger off. We can all bugger off. So yeah, number of things. I think the ICB. I'm going to say a bit about UK Active. The UK Active exemplar program with the ICBs. Mike Farrar, the chair, got his little black book out and invited 5 ICBs if they wanted to work more closely with physical activity in our sector. The last I heard that there's the 5 have all agreed. GM's one of them. I'll come onto that in a minute. And actually, there's more ICBs saying, actually, can we join as well? So I think there's a growing appetite from health to work with us in some shape or form. Second thing on that is sharing best practice and the sort of get on with it. There's lots of people getting on with it. Warren will tell the story of 15 years he's been building these relationships in GM. Mark Tweedy started GM Active in 2015, Mark, something like that. So coming on a decade. And again, I'll come back to that in a minute. But so one of the things that UK Active have agreed after some discussion is that they're going to help us in some shape or form. We don't know the detail yet, to create a repository of best practice to do what Martin's been doing sort of more recently, but try and find and collate the examples of best practice, look at how those things are evaluated so that we can share best practice amongst ourselves to stop reinventing the wheel all over the place. So it's still a local approach, but sharing best practice, but also then we can show our health colleagues and say, look, this is what we're doing in all these different health conditions and things like that. So I think that's quite urgent, actually, that we get on with that and actually, as I say, look at the evaluation side of things of that. And the last thing I'll say, just back on the ICB, we've got in GM, we've got the Pre-Op for Cancer, probably all sick of hearing about it, but That's growing, but it's also under threat. It's like, is it going to be pulled because there's no money, or is it going to grow to 10,000, 20,000? And obviously, we hope it's the latter. We're doing an evaluation, we being the NHS, GM Cancer are doing another evaluation of it to try and protect ourselves, stuff like that. But it's still under threat, even though it's proven to be really good. On the other hand, and I can't go into detail, I don't know it, but also I'm sworn to secrecy, but there's going to be some really exciting news from the GM ICB very, very shortly, where they're going to basically, they're investing in prevention effectively through GM Moving and ourselves. So the point being, that's 9 years since GM Active started. GM Active haven't made this happen. It's a combination of GM Active, GM Moving, blah, blah, blah. But there's going to be something really exciting, which hopefully on the back of the UK Active ICB stuff will start to help the narrative that there is some investment going to be going into prevention. There you go. I'll shut up.
No, Andy, really useful. And it just shows the power of relationship building, doesn't it? This is all about relationships, and it's taken 9 years for you to build those relationships to get this to the point. So, don't wait for somebody to give you some money to do GP referral. Build those relationships has to be the message. Thank you. Matt, your hand's gone down. Has everything been covered?
It was just a preemptive hand down. Still want to briefly speak if I can.
Go.
Yeah, I mean, much of what I was going to say has been touched on already or answered by Andy's comment. I guess the point that I was going to make was, as we referenced, a lot of it comes back to relationships, and a lot of it comes back to people, whether that's members, whether that's officers, whatever. And those relationships, as we've heard, take time to cultivate. And I appreciate the comments throughout around, giving the voice to the younger people. But from my personal perspective, remains a huge role for the more experienced people around the coaching and leadership and support that you can provide to the likes of myself. I think as well, we need to be pushing at an open door, and we have to appreciate that not everyone's in the same scenario. And I agree with John's comment around it's not necessarily mutually exclusive in terms of those local and national relationships. But I do agree we still need to work on that. We use the Active Oxfordshire example. And I just think there's a massive fragmented approach still in terms of active partnerships. I see nil value and nil support in our locality, and that's been the case for years, which is a frustration. And then just finally, I think that repository would be so useful, because if we have that consistency of message, that we know it's in a language that will land well with the people who are trying to speak to, it gives the people that are at the stage where they're just beginning these relationships and just pushing on that door more strength in their argument and more confidence in their case. So I think everything that has been said already is the movement we need to take, and one certainly that 18 months in post now sort of recognise from myself. I am literally just starting to push on those doors. Now we've sorted what we needed to. We need to take the next step.
Brilliant, Matt.
David, can
Martyn,
I just jump in and respond to the bit about the role of the more experienced people? I keep using the concept of leadership because I think that's absolutely key here. I didn't say in my introduction, I've spent the last few years doing a lot of leadership development with elected members, and we've been running the leadership programs for Sport England, which are now being rolled out as part of the place work, which is all fantastic. But they're a microcosm of what's needed. David knows I'm going to say that I've constantly been critical of SIMSPA, that they haven't grasped the whole need to develop the quality of leadership across this sector, because it's the leadership that starts the relationship building. And there's some tremendous, we've run 20 leadership programs for what I would call officers, probably done 40 for elected members. And when you get people in a room and you give them the understanding, the context, some of the tools, some of the abilities, they go back far, not only better motivated, but better equipped. And the number of those people who then come back to me and say, those 3 days were when I completely changed my whole perspective on this and I got the confidence. So as a sector, we've got to start demanding an investment in leadership development above anything else, because we won't grow this unless we grow the ability to lead differently. And you know, Andy's piloted this around operational people in Greater Manchester. That should be running across the country by now. It should be in every locality. And it's not. And why not? So yeah, leadership's
right,
the key.
Absolutely. Andy, do you want to respond to that based on some of the stuff you've been partnering with Ken and that type of work at the moment? And then Mark, I'll come to you.
Yeah, I mean, just briefly, thanks, Martin. I totally agree with you, as you know, and I think that so the transformation leadership we put together was to try and interpret the work from the leadership essentials program that Martin runs, and some of the stuff that GM were putting out there with Debbie Sorkin and people like that about whole systems, place-based approaches, and try and translate it. What does it mean to a general manager? And you know, we've had 80 managers go through that now, and Future Fit have been great helping us develop it and what have you. We actually put a proposal, we being Muva and Future Fit and stuff, we put a proposal to Simspa to say, look, can we not do a leadership academy around this lens? Long story short, it didn't go. They were like, yeah, be great, but we haven't got any money. Sport England wouldn't fund it. I suspect its time will come. It's just that people take a long time to catch on. Do you know what I mean? It's like crikey. But what is happening, of course, is the big investment from Sport England and the whole systems place-based approaches. My fear is, and there's already some evidence of this, that the leisure operators, for want of a better term, are not really included in that. It's a place-based approach. So I said it yesterday at Elevate. It's like, you've got to find out. We have to find out. We have to take ownership of that. So if it's anywhere in our patch, we need to go and bang the door down and say, make sure that we're included and get in there.
But if they're not included, Andy, it's not a place-based approach.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's as simple as that. I mean, I piloted the bloody programs in Birmingham and the Wirral, and we insisted that the operators were in the room with us, alongside NHS people and social care people and the deputy director of highways and planning. You know, and we were all in the room together. Now, you know, if operators aren't in those place-based working, then something's gone very, very, very wrong from the outset.
It has, Martin, and it's all to do, I think, with the relationship between the active partnership. Love them or hate them, they exist. That's the conduit. You have to have that relationship, and you have to go and have that discussion.
You're back to tribes, Andy.
Yeah, exactly. So don't let it happen. That was the message yesterday. It's like, look, go and find out if it's anywhere near your patch, get involved. When they're building the budget for what they want in that place, make sure there's something to train your leisure staff, because I've seen examples already where they're being excluded.
Yeah. Well, that just typifies our sector. Sorry. Yeah. Right. Let's all play on our own pitch and bugger the rest.
That's sports people for you, Martin, unfortunately. Come on, Mark Tweedy, let's throw some positivity in.
Oh, you're asking me to work hard now, Dave. Yeah, well, a couple of remarks, really, just to say you never would have thought that Martin was over 100 years old. Obviously, retirement serving him really, really well. And it's lovely to have Martin's experience in the room. And thanks for your remarks, Martin. And equally, you know, Andy as well, you know, it's a tough job being in the CEO MD lane of a trading company or a trust or whatever. It's not easy. So, you know, Martin, Andy and myself and John, you know, we've all got that empathy with everybody, and it's lovely to share this forum on a regular basis. So hopefully we can share some of our experience and support everybody in the room that's in the fast lane. Coming back to Reese's point before, you know, it's wonderful to be able to do that. And when you talk about ICBs, Andy, ICBMs come into my head, intercontinental ballistic missile, for some reason. And my point here is that the Labour government is about to come in, as per Martyn's point before. Change might be quick, and it almost feels like there'll be an ICBM fired into the system, and there's an opportunity to really shake things up and change stuff. So we've got to be ready for that. So I love that point that Martyn mentioned before. And it's important that this group as well, we do challenge ourselves. We don't create an echo chamber, and the passion that's in the room, you know, we continue with that. And it's a really exciting forum to be in. And what we're talking about is the strategic stuff here, not necessarily, you know, the stuff that's on the ground that's going to help on a day-to-day basis, but how we position strategically. And this group can have a contribution to the national agenda. I just want to finish on that point in a minute. But there's a couple of the things I want to say before I shut up. I think there's a podcast out there called The Conveners, which a guy called Andy King and John Oxley run. And I listened to the recent episode with Sarah Hayden Goodwin, who's a director of Place and Partnership for Gloucestershire. And it was really interesting. If you haven't listened to that, I'd recommend it to everybody. And Sarah's great. She comes across really well. And she has got empathy with leisure as well, because what she said was, she worries that leisure hasn't got the capacity to do that outreach, that relation building work locally, because you're so bogged down with internal operations. And that's a point that came up earlier, you know, and we do have to make that capacity, and that's really hard. You know, I've been there myself. I've managed organizations, and I know how tough it is, and how tough it is to release your staff as well. And active partnerships are a resource for that. You know, they will spend their majority of the time reaching out, running workshops, having conversations, getting all committees and the meetings with the NHS, you know, and being part of that system. And I think there is a shout out to the active partnerships, and this is Andy's point yesterday, that somehow we need to influence them at the national level so it filters down locally. So they do represent leisure, and they can help us, because they recognise, as Sarah said, we haven't got the capacity. We can be present, but we can't be everywhere all the time. And they need to help us with that brokerage at that local level. And in order to help us, they need to understand what our offer is. They need to clearly understand that. And the issue with the sector at the moment, leisure, I think, is that we're just not clear nationally or locally what we're about, what it is we're doing. And it's complex, because the default setting is, oh, well, you're just after the 15%, you know, you just have to making money, you know. And we're having conversations here. And there was a conversation earlier. Someone mentioned, well, actually, I was at Elevate to talk about, to listen and understand what people are doing to attract the 85%, you know, the non-users, and how it can impact on health. And actually, I know we're all about that in this room. So I think there's a piece of work for us to do to understand what our lane is. We're very action orientated, and what it is we're about. And actually, if we're about the 85% from a targeted perspective, which I think is where we need to be, we need a good targeted offer, which is going to reach out and engage that 85%. And I think the first port of call is to target, under the new government, those types of services that are going to reduce NHS and social care demand. So it's the pre-ab, rehab cancer. It's all the stuff to support with long-term health conditions. We need to major on that. That needs to be our first priority. So we're about the 85%, and actually part of the 85% that we're interested in is the aging population and people with long-term health conditions. And we need to get behind that. And I think that's a big opportunity for us going forward under a new government. Absolutely massive, and scale up those targeted services. The given is that our 15% is our universal offer, and we need that to balance the books commercially. And that's a given. We don't need to talk about that. That's just the given. It's how we're adapting our services around the 85%. And then in terms of Dave's great point earlier, it's about positioning that not in a physical activity lane, in a health lane. We need to stop talking about physical activity. It devalues, undermines, undersells what we offer. We're about health improvement. We're about connection. We're about mental health improvement, all through the tool, and physical health improvement, all through the tool of being active. And we need to elaborate and embellish that more around what we do around the 80% targeted market. And I think if we can do that and do that nationally, and this group can influence that, I think we'll clarify what the opportunity is with leisure, how we can pivot, how we can reposition the assets and the workforce with a bit of workforce development, and make a big impact, not just health-wise, but economically. because the economic argument is the productive argument, which Dave said before. We can help the nation be more productive. We can reduce the amount of the 5 million that have gone out of work, the 3 million that are on long-term sick. And we need to start talking about this. We need to move away from come and get physically active in your leisure centre. It's much more than that. It's much broader and much deeper. And if we can get the offer around that and understand what our lane is and take action, because we're action orientated, we'll go a long way. So I think my ask to the group is, what can we do? What can we take away from today to say, how can we influence the national agenda on this if we agree? There you go, Dave. Was that positive enough for you?
Absolutely, and a really good challenge to the group. And something I did yesterday, I did the graveyard shift yesterday at Elevate and did a section on participation, and it was really interesting actually, because my audience wasn't the audience I was expecting. They were all basically people who were working in health. So Basildon were there. There was some social prescribers there, etc. And in the end, I just stopped and said, right, okay, who's prepared to tell me what you're going to do differently as a result of today? And that was the moment the tumbleweed happened and my audience reduced. And it's fascinating. All these people turned up and sat there and listened, but nobody was prepared to say what they were going to do differently. With a little bit of cajoling, as you'd expect, I managed to get 3 people to tell us what they were going to do differently. And actually, it was all about understanding, because we'd introduced 2 things, doing our bit, and we'd introduced the active practice charter from the General Council of General Practitioners to the audience that didn't know anything about it. And it was terrifying. We keep standing there talking about us being physical activity, the miracle pill, but actually we've not built these relationships. We've not built the opportunities to do something differently. So answer Mark's question, what are we going to do? What things are floating around in people's head that you actually are going to physically do? You know, you're going to, finish this call and you're going to stick an hour in your diary on Monday or Tuesday of next week. What are you going to do with that time? There you go. My audience is disappearing. I told you it would.
David, can I just make, while they're thinking what they're going to do, I just want to make a plug for a paper I wrote. It's on Sport Think Tank. I wrote last year, which came as a result of a piece of research that had been done into integrated care systems and their first few months of existence. And it was a fascinating insight into change. And what I did in that paper is compared their journey with the journey I thought we were about to go through with the expansion of place work and everything we're talking about today. It might be worth revisiting that, because the first thing it says that there is a huge problem across integrated care systems with having a shared understanding and a shared language. And I think that's absolutely true. Mark's just said it. We bandy around words in the sector like place working. I suspect if I asked you, you'd all have a different understanding of what place working is. We use the term system change. Well, what the hell's system change? We use the term pivot to health. Well, what does that mean? So we need to get better about, as they're having to do, what do we mean by some of these terminologies? And then they talk about 5 risks to integrated care systems. And a lot of them you would recognise in this conversation: lack of capacity, being overwhelmed by the day job, not having the right relationships, the relationship between the top-down national local and local national upwards. Every time I keep hearing conversations like that, I go back to that paper, because we're struggling with exactly the same risks. And I think, as well as doing everything that Mark says, we've got to also understand the risks that are inherent in the journey and address those risks. Otherwise, the risks will kill us on the road. So I think you know where it is, Dave, if you want to do a link to it to other people. And if people want to share any conversations on it, I'm more than happy to do so. We need to understand, we don't just need to learn from ourselves. we need to learn from other people who are going through this same journey of system change and place working and shifting the thinking.
And just before Reece, I also just want to put a shot across our bows. My sister-in-law works for Surrey Heartlands, which is the new ICS in that area. They've just formed and created, and as a result of that, there are 65 senior leaders on the redundancy list. Yeah, so ICS ICB is not necessarily going to be the place that actually is as comfortable and as safe as we think it is. So, you know, they are cutting back because they just don't have the budget. Sorry, I don't like being negative, but Reece, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. The other hand grenade I want to drop in here as well is, you know, let's just think in a blue sky world where we've got all these wonderful conversations happening. Are our workforce ready to be involved in this? You know, can anybody pull off a shelf and tell me what a modern well-being coach should have in terms of skills and qualifications? Because I haven't seen it yet, and I've made quite a bit of noise around it. Because I think there's something else which, you know, we really need to push people on. Because, you know, I've been trying to do this for a while now, and I've had some success, but what I've experienced is the skills in CPD is quite different wherever you are. It's different in Cardiff to Plymouth, and different in Swindon to Bristol. So, you know, who's coordinating that, Martyn?
I totally agree, and you know, I've heard plenty of people talk about that whole issue. Something I do for a bit of fun every so often, I get an email, I can't remember who it is, but somebody telling me all the leisure jobs that's currently on the market this week, and it's fascinating because I just delve down into pick a few. And actually, the job descriptions for supervisor or manager, or as you say, are the same job descriptions I used to put out when I was running facilities. Do we ever look at our job descriptions and think? Yeah,
it's mad, you know. What do they need? This is CPD as well, and wellness. You're bringing people in who are, you know, anxiety, lack of sleep, diet, you know, all that kind of, you know, what is it? What should we be looking at? You know, in a modern world, it's a big thing. I'm getting all passionate with my hands as well, Nate, Dave. So I'll pass on to someone else.
No, Reece, that it's really important, and that passion is making everybody on this call smile. Honestly, it's brilliant. Mark, can I just come to you? I'm just going to go before John, because I think you might have something to say about that role descriptor, because I know you did a lot of work in Brimham's on that piece, didn't you? You're on mute, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. And me and Reece have chatted about this a number of times.
Right.
And, you know, I was in a position 2.5 years ago where I wanted to move the service from a fitness to a wellness-based service across those wider domains of health, which Reece mentioned. We had to design our own CPD program. I did reach out to the sector, SIMSPR, some training providers. But it was a bit of like, well, just take action locally, don't ask permission. And we just got on with it. And I think, you know, that's what people have been saying earlier in the call. But our life would have been made much easier if there was more of a shared vision nationally for leisure, and it just isn't there. We've no vision, we've no strategy. It's just, there's no strategy or plan, so any direction will do. So we cannot expect the national agencies to get behind the development of a CPD program which is going to fit this purpose, because there's no strategy, vision or plan to back it. We're just in the wilderness leisure. It's just not there. You know, and I've read Martyn's paper, you know, the national, regional, local and all those dynamics. And again, just being really clear about what I'm talking about. My view is we need a national vision. We need a strategy for leisure, but with local delivery, tailored local delivery in the place. But there needs to be a national framework, because without the framework, resources from Sport England government can't be channeled in to produce what Reece is asking for, which is a nationally backed CPD programme for the leisure workforce of the future. And that's what we need. It's open to the market, the whims of the free market at the moment. There's multiple commercial training providers jumping in, doing this, that and the other. There's no quality standards, professional standards. We're a million miles away from having allied wellness professionals working in leisure centres, which I think would be a fantastic vision. It gives us credibility alongside the NHS. But again, coming back to my point earlier, as a group, we're a group of intelligent, passionate people. We've got a little bit of clout. We need to grow our clout, and we need to get in and influence this agenda at the national level. And that's what we need to do. You know, support people like Andy, who's on national platforms now on the basis of GM Active and stuff like that. That's really driving this. You know, Reece was on the panel the other day at Elevate. We talked about that. You know, I think that's what we need to do, because it just feels like it's drifting a little bit, but we have got some momentum, and obviously we've got the new government coming up as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mark. John, and then Scott.
Yeah, thanks. I suppose just following on a bit from Mark and Reece, and a comment that Martin made earlier in the discussion. As a trustee of CIMSPA, I think that CIMSPA needs to be central in these discussions. There is a little bit of a super tanker issue. You know, it's difficult to change course, but just to give you some reassurance that there actually is quite a lot of work that's been doing to recognise the changing emphasis around job roles. That there are a number of, just to push back a little bit, Mark, that there are quite a number of professional standards that are in place. I chair the UK board on professional standards. That's not to say that they're perfect. They're far from perfect, but they are there, and there is a process to change that, to make sure that they're relevant and credible. The other thing I'd say, just to add a little bit of positivity onto the people agenda from a sort of corporate large focus, a larger role is the work that the local skills advisory boards are starting to do now, which is picking up exactly the point about bringing a consistent generic approach, a skeleton, if you like, to how we do things, but making it more bespoke at a local level. So those discussions are happening now. There are some great examples. It may be, Dave, that for a future meeting we could invite Spencer or Tara or somebody to come along and just talk about that. So some of these completely legitimate questions as to whether CIMSPA is relating now to the current agendas, we can put to them directly. But the local skills advisory boards, for those who aren't familiar with them, brings together employers and a whole range of different stakeholders to understand what the issues are in the local area. And I think that although there is a super tanker and sixpence issue here, it is recognised, it is making progress. Whether it's making progress quickly enough is, of course, is another issue. But just to add that slight rebalance.
Thanks. Martin, do you want to reply on that before Scott comes in, or is it something different, Martin? You're on mute.
Just quick. I don't want to get into a argument with John about CIMSPA, but I'll just put it this way. I think sometimes there is a difference between what people want and what people need. I think CIMSPA have reached out to a lot of people through these regional conversations with employers to find out what people want. I'm not sure the people they're talking to know what they need. And when we do the leadership work, we always ask people before they come on what they would like us to deal with on the program. And the majority of time, what we're going to give them isn't necessarily what they wanted.
Yeah, there's an element, Martin, of the old Rumsfeld known unknowns and unknown unknowns, isn't there? I mean, I think it starts with a conversation. So in sort of rather crude terms, you match supply with demand, you match need with requirement, and
I think a lot of
that may be the gap.
I think a lot of the problem is a lot of our training providers depend on people wanting to pay, so it's want driven. And not necessarily what probably the sector or the profession wants them to have. And that's the debate that I think you need to have with CIMSPA. Should we be saying, I don't care what you want, these are the skills and leadership abilities you need?
Yeah. Well, now's the time to do that with the relatively new SIMSPA strategy.
Yeah.
Okay, Scott.
Yeah,
just
following on from Reese's point, really, I just totally agree, because I'm just reviewing all the health and fitness JDs and stuff. What I'm finding is that we've got 2 or 3 very talented fitness instructors that are really hitting the health agenda, and thankfully the local authority do pay for some of their training. So 3 of our instructors are now level 4. They do like cancer, fall preventions, etc., which is great. And it does take a lot of their time. There's no additional funding for it. So what I'm now finding is that, yes, they're now working with the 85%, but they're also, I'm going to say not neglecting, but the 15% are now suffering because they're spending so much time. I've got no additional budget. And that's been a challenge. And what I'm going to take away, by the way, Dave, because you did ask the question, I will come back to it, is exactly what you guys are saying. I don't shout about it enough, or Rubicon Leisure don't shout about that enough. Because they're all positive stories and we get all the feedback, but I'm not sure we do it internally. We talk to the departments, but we don't maybe say it to the right people. And that'll be my takeaway, by the way, Dave. So I have answered your question. I don't know if anyone else is finding that taking out your fitness team to do all the health work, and because I run 9 facilities and only 1 leisure centre. Some people find that leisure centre quite a daunting place to come into. So we've got a visitor centre and stuff. But now not only am I moving my fitness team out from their arena, their normal arena, to do their show rounds and talks, etc., the normal stuff that's a given, I'm now taking them out of the actual place where they are working to meet the demand elsewhere within the borough. So that's quite a challenge as well.
Scott, the one thing I'll take from that is how often you corrected yourself on the language that you used. It was really interesting there. You kept saying where they should work or where they could. And it was really interesting because that says in your head, you're reflecting, you're realigning, and you're thinking about what this actually means and where it goes. And language is so important, as Mark and Martin will attest to. Mark, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, actually, I'm following on quite nicely from Scott's point, and also want to come back on John as well. So the path of least resistance for all operators is to target the 15%. That's the path of least resistance. It's where you're going to get most of your financial returns for the least input. And anyone can challenge me, but it's really easy just to have a fitness focused service. It's the easiest, peasiest thing to manage, dead easy. The complexity is when you're looking at the 85%. Now, because it's the path of least resistance on the 15%, our national agencies, UK Active, SIMSPA, are forced to default to that in terms of providing what people need, because a large proportion of their membership is from the private sector, which are targeting unashamedly the 15%. And of course they should, because they're a private entity. Some have got shareholders and everything else. That's exactly the situation. As long as we're grouped with those providers, we will suffer collateral damage, and that is the situation. And what we need to do is be really clear, as I said before, what our lane is, what lane we're in. And if we're in the lane of the 85%, we need to be really clear what we're going to do to target that group and the support we need from our national agencies. And it is encouraging to hear, John, and I know I had a conversation with Tara, I don't know, 7 years ago about this. She came up to visit us in Tameside and we talked about the concept of wellness and stuff like that back then. But I know SIMSPA are under pressure to deliver for the majority of their membership, which is still fitness focused. And that's why in 7 years, this kind of stuff hasn't properly emerged yet. But I do agree, John. I know it's moving in that direction, and that's encouraging. But we need to understand our lane, which is the 85%. We need to get that support nationally around it. And we do need a level of disassociation with the private sector, because the private sector will continue to focus on fitness. Absolutely. There's a new term which a colleague of mine has come up with. He's called it pivot washing. And I love it because it's where certain agencies are coming on the back of, yes, we're pivoting to health and well-being, but actually it's just a veneer. There's nothing underneath it. There's no substance. And we have to guard against that. And my final point, and it speaks to Scott, because I was on your journey, Scott, at Brimham's. I wasn't contractually obligated to do it, but I made some decisions to invest more in our workforce. So paying people more because they had higher qualifications, putting more wellness coaches in when I could have had less lower qualified fitness instructors and got a greater financial return, and put some extra management capacity in for people to go and reach out to the integrated care boards and work with public health. I added that cost overhead because it was the right thing to do, and I wanted to evidence impact. I could have done it a lot cheaper and a lot easier, but I added that cost overhead in, knowing that the fruit wouldn't drop in our garden. It was going to be a saving to the system, not necessarily to Brimham's, and that's what we did. Okay, and this is where we need the backing nationally with the vision and plan on this stuff, because if we continue as we are, it's going nowhere. We need things to move much quicker. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Have we got anything else for Martyn before I ask Martyn just to conclude with either a call to action or an offer of support or whatever it happens to be? Is there anything we'd like to ask Martyn? No? Okay, Martyn, you have the last few words.
Wow. I'll just do a bit of crystal ball gazing. I'll probably be totally wrong, but let's give it a go. I think we will see a Labour government appointed in a few weeks' time. They will move ahead at a huge speed, but I think it'll be a good 2 to 3 years before we'll see a flow of additional funding into public services. I think therefore we have two years to really do everything that Mark's just said. I find that analysis inspiring. It is now up to us to get a handle on being ready as resources start to be freed up you're right, David, they're struggling for funding at the moment, and some of them are shedding and having to shed. But as if they can get their heads around how they clear some of that backlog, they know they've got to shift into prevention. It'll be a slow shift, but that shift will come. Councils will gradually get some headroom, and they will want to reinvest in things that they think is really important. So I think as a sector, we've got to hit the ground running on the 5th of July with a narrative. Mark's absolutely right. We've got to be crystal clear about our language. We've got to be much more joined up across the sector. I did a piece this week where I went through all the different organisations' manifestos. There were 20 different asks from SIMSPA, UK Active, 20 different asks of a government. So we've got to get our own act together and join some of this up. And I think that's the journey. I think if we miss this huge opportunity of a new political framework, we're dead. I'm sorry, we're dead.
Okay, Martyn, you've just encouraged us all to build relationships, to start talking to people, because if we wait for that 2 years, it'll be too late. So let's spend that time building relationships right now. Let's find those people who have got some synergy with what we do and how we can support and offer potential solutions, and let's take some action. Mark, thank you. That's really important around that whole top end piece. Martyn, thank you so much for your time today. It's just so useful to have these types of conversations at this level. And Martyn, please continue doing what you do so well. Thank you for your time. Cheers, Martyn.
Thanks, everyone.
Take
Good luck.
care.
You deserve all the luck you can get. Okay. Bye,
Cheers,
guys.
Martyn. See you soon. Have a good weekend. Brilliant. Right, I'm just going to stop the recording. Fab job.